This story is called Fruit of the Fairy Folk. The medlar tree is a strange tree, somehow making its way out of the enchanted land of the fairy folk and into our own. Then, following the trade routes of long ago and ending up in this green and pleasant land, with its large flowers of white and its broad apple-like leaves, it looks as though it should bear some large, brightly coloured fruit, but it does not. The fruit of the medlar tree is small, just the right size for the fairy folk. It has a dull, rough, brownish skin that is called russeting. Some apples have a similar look to their skin, like the Ashmead kernel, an old variety that has gone out of favour these days, not grown for its look but for its flavour, or the Egremont russet, its name suggesting the skin of the apple. And now, another of these strange things about the medlar fruit is that it is hard and not nice to eat until it is almost started to rot, for then the flesh inside turns an orangey brown, and then starts to soften and become sweet, with subtle hints of cinnamon and vanilla. The process that the fruit grows through, from being hard to soft and edible, is called bletting. It comes from the French word bletter, to become overripe. When this happens, you could imagine the fairy folk perhaps taking out a runcible spoon, the name made up by Edward Lear for such a spoon. It has a long, thin handle with short prongs at the end, a bit like a spork, but with one edge of the spoon slightly sharp to cut through the medlar skin and scoop out the delights within. So, on with the story. There once was a little girl who wanted to attract the fairy folk into her garden in which she played. Her name was Madeline. Madeline wondered how she could do it. So she went to talk with her grandfather, who was so wise in such matters, for Madeline could remember he used to tell her stories of the fairy folk when she was younger.
"Grandfather," asked Madeline, "how can I get the fairy folk to come into the garden so I may see them and play with them?"
Madeline's grandfather thought and thought, then came his answer. "Play with them you must not, for fairy folk are tricksters and full of enchantment, and they may lull you into a world that is not theirs or even our own, and there you might be stuck forever lost in a world on your own. There is, however, such a thing that will bring them closer to you, so you might be able to get a glimpse of them, and that, my sweet child, is the medlar tree."
"A what tree?"
Madeline questioned. "The medlar tree. The fruit is the most favourite food of the fairy folk," replied the grandfather. Madeline begged her grandfather,
"Can we grow one? Can we? Please, can we, grandfather?"
The grandfather again thought and said, "Why not? I know where one grows already, and we can take a cutting from it." The grandfather took Madeline to the tree and snipped a piece out of it, then showed her how to propagate it by grafting it onto a quince, carefully binding it up and covering it with wax. "In late spring we will have to untie the binding when the cutting has healed," the grandfather said. Over the next few months, Madeline watched the new tree send out shoots and leaves, and in the late spring she helped to untie the binding and support the new shoot with a cane as the new tree was forming.
"When do you think they'll come, grandfather?"
"Who?" replied grandfather.
"The little folk,"
Madeline explained excitedly. You will have to be very patient, my girl. You have a long way to go yet, maybe years, if they come at all." The first year came and went, and there was nothing to be seen on Madeline's new medlar tree. No flowers, no fruit, no fairy folk. But Madeline was not disheartened and created another new medlar tree with her grandfather. The second year came and went. 3 flowers, no fruit, no fairy folk. But again she made another new medlar tree, this time by herself. The third year came and went. This time more flowers and 2 fruits, but still no fairy folk. And again Madeline made another medlar tree. There were now 4 medlars in a row, all at different stages of growth. The first fully formed small tree, the second just started to look like a tree in shape, with a thin wisp of a stem with 5 shoots sticking out at the top. The third just a strong shoot growing up from the trunk, and the fourth just a few leaves ready to shoot up. By the 5th year, the first tree had a lot more fruit, and the second tree even had a few too. One winter's day, Madeline and her grandfather were out in the garden making ready for the next medlar tree to grow, when, "Fist!" something flew past. "Do you think that was them, grandfather?" Madeline asked. "I don't know. I didn't see anything," said the grandfather. "I just heard a sound." As the years went by, Madeline grew, and so did the trees. Now quite an impressive orchard of medlar trees, and more strange sightings of things around those trees. There was also the odd strange noise, as if something flew past, and often at the right time of year, just after the first frost, some of the fruit would have holes carefully cut into them, and would be completely hollowed out inside. It seemed as if though something had scooped the insides out with a tiny spoon. Some of the village children teased Madeline a little about her medlars, making up rhymes like, "Mad meddling Maddie makes more medlars than a meddling Maddie should make. If Maddie makes any more medlars, she would surely be in a meddling medlar's muddle." Madeline never told the other children why she was growing medlar trees. A few more years had passed, and the orchard had become quite established, with plenty of fruit. One night, on the eve of the winter solstice, Madeline could hear strange, faint music coming from outside, and gently she opened the door into the garden and quietly slipped out. Madeline then sat on an upturned flower pot not far from the medlars in the orchard. Madeline sat quietly as she possibly could, for when her eyes got accustomed to the dark, the trees were full of faint glows from little figures flitting from tree to tree, dancing and laughing. Some of these little figures were eating with tiny, long-handled spoons, poking them into the medlar fruit through neatly cut holes. Madeline watched for hours, hardly daring to breathe. Then she could see some of the little figures sleepily falling back into the leaves, silhouetted by the faint glow. She could just make out round, full tummies of the fairy folk, where they had fed on the medlar fruit. So all those years spent waiting for the medlar trees to grow and form fruit were well worth the wait. Some of the best things in life are worth the waiting for.